Well, after the truly horrific, horrifying Southport murders, we are now starting to finally find out the truth about this monster. You'll remember Nigel Farage being condemned for questioning at the time whether we were being told the full truth or not.
In the wake of that horrendous murder of those 3 girls in Southport last summer, just 24 hours afterwards, there was a huge amount of speculation about who the suspected murderer was. I put out this video and I asked this basic question.
I have to say there are 1 or 2 questions. Was this guy being monitored by the security services? Some reports say he was, others less sure. I just wonder whether the truth is being withheld from us. I don't know the answer to that, but I think it is a fair and legitimate question.
So I asked the question, was he known to the authorities? No answer came from the police. No answer came from the Prime Minister. No answer came from the Home Secretary. And for daring to ask a question that the public deserved to know and should have known, and actually had they known, might have stopped much of the online speculation that led to rioting on the scale that we saw. No, nothing was forthcoming at all. I was even told I wasn't allowed to ask a question in the House of Commons about the identity of this man and whether he was known.
And what are we now learning? Well, we're now learning that this monster had been referred 3 times to the Prevent programme, and that a week before this horrifying attack where he stabbed those 3 young girls to death, a week before that, he was prevented from returning to his former school, with his father pleading to a taxi driver not to take him to the school, and that at that time he was wearing the same sweatshirt and mask he wore during the attack 1 week later. Now, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, facing questions on this today, including from Harry Cole, asking the Prime Minister today about all of this, about information being withheld from the public.
Harry.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Sorry to lay this point, but I think it's important. All summer we were repeatedly told that the Stockport attack was not terror-related, it wasn't being treated as terror-related. That wasn't true. Because in October, the monster was charged with terror offence. Now, information was put into the public domain then that didn't collapse the trial, it didn't jeopardise justice, it was just months later. Now, you say you knew about the ricin and the Al-Qaeda bomb manual and it was known to the authorities. Did you know about that personally at the same time the public, the press, and you and the police were saying this is not terror related? Because I think that's the nub of the issue and that's what's upset people. You say you couldn't speak out publicly, that you couldn't do that, but didn't the public have a right to know, not least the neighbours who had ricin being produced on their street? Surely they had a right to know.
Well, I think there are 2 separate and important issues there, Harry. The first is on the question of terrorism and what constitutes terrorism. And my concern in this case is that we have clearly got an example of extreme violence, individualised violence, that we have to protect our children from and our citizens from. And it is a new threat. It's not what we would have usually thought of as terrorism when definitions were drawn up, when guidelines were put in place, when the framework was put in place. And we have to recognise that here today, because I think most people would say, looking at the facts of this case, it's clearly extreme violence, it's clearly intended to terrorise. And I completely accept and understand that, and that is my view. Therefore, we have to make sure that the law and the framework for responding is appropriate to the new threat that we face. And there we will make whatever changes are necessary in the law to deal with it. On the second point, yes, of course I was kept up to date with the facts as they were emerging. That is usual practice. But just like you, as a journalist, I had to observe the law of the land. It was not my personal decision to withhold this information, any more than it was a journalist's personal decision not to print or write about it. That is the law of the land that is in place for the reasons I've set out, to protect the integrity of the system, to ensure that the victims and their families get the justice that they deserve.
After Starmer's press conference, you did have the Reform Deputy Leader, Richard Tice, accusing the Prime Minister of still misleading and gaslighting the British people over Southport. And this was Richard Tice's response to what we heard from the Prime Minister today.
The Prime Minister is continuing to deliberately mislead the British people to continue suiting his own narrative. And I'm afraid all of this nonsense that he couldn't say anything is simply untrue. And it's not true to say that the nature of terrorism has changed. In 2016, the murder of Joe Cox, Thomas Mayer was immediately declared an act of terrorism by one individual. 2017, the murder of Keith Palmer here in Westminster by Khalid Massoud, immediately declared an act of terror. August 18, car attack outside Westminster, immediately declared an act of terror by one individual. December 18, Mahdi Mohammed stabbing 3 people in Manchester Airport, an act of terror declared immediately by one individual. What's happened here is that the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary, as he admitted this morning, knew within hours what was going on. He will have known about the background of this individual. They've made the deliberate judgment to withhold information from the British people that they could have told the British people because Axel Ruda-Cabana was not charged until the 1st of August. So we could have been told, we should have been told about the prevent and the failings, and it should have been declared a terror incident within 24 hours. That is why the British people were so angry and are still raging about this.